if you brought back like an ancient human and you put them just like in a typical day in the life today, like me, case in point, I have two phones right now. I have my laptop, I have my email that might beep. I hope it doesn't. I have some people have house phones still. There was a car that just beeped outside. I live in New York. Like, no person could keep up with all of those distractions. Like, we just simply did not evolve with all those faculties. And it's why there's a lot of research. We like to ignore it because we think we're the exception of the rule that says like multitasking is impossible. No person, no matter how good they think they are at task switching and being able to handle all these distractions, we just simply can't, for all the reasons you say. We're limited. And nature in some ways is, one of the only things that can sort of like reset the dials. Yes. And I mean, we could talk about this if we get to talking about part 3, but for me, I think it taught me that I often feel like very stressed and overwhelmed and easily distracted. And like, I'm famous for having like 300 text messages at all times that I have not responded to. And I think after I spend time in nature, I'm more able to, I'm better at judging my stressors. Like, how much of this is just me being stressed about stress? Can I break this down into smaller parts? It really is a wonder drug.
Truly. Oh my goodness. And I love, you gave an example too. We don't have to go into it. I'll let people read the book, but about the man who went fishing. I think that was part of the nature chapter, right? Yeah. The man who joined a fishing group, and how restorative that was to his attention. And I was able to relate to that very strongly. I grew up and my father is like a great fisherman. He loves fishing. He took my brothers and I fishing very often. He's now taking my children and his other grandkids fishing. And it is uniquely beneficial. I remember one person from that group that you were talking about described it as this, like, you have these kind of periods of concentration that are pretty frequently rewarded. They're kind of, it's almost just basic operant conditioning and like the schedule of reinforcements. It's unpredictable. And in psychology, we know that, interestingly, unpredictable, variable schedules of reinforcement actually are more reinforcing to certain behaviors. And fishing fits right into that because you never know when you're going to catch the fish. Yes. And so you're concentrated. And then at some point, eventually, but unpredictably, you're rewarded big time. It's very rewarding. So I just thought, and again, kind of like what we were saying with movement, there's so many ways to connect with nature. You can fish, you can hike, you can scuba dive, you can, whatever it looks like, personalize it. And I love too the link workers. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, starting to talk about the system of it all, but how often when these prescriptions are made, whoever's making the prescription will connect the patient, the client, with a link worker who gets to know the individual and attempts to personalize the social prescriptions. And I just think that is worth highlighting. That's super important.
Definitely. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The link workers are so key. And I'm happy to talk about that. But, one more thing with fishing, which, first of all, I love that you personally have been prescribed yourself this. Your dad is now prescribing your kids this. I also think there's something very important there about it being accessible for men. Like, I think a lot of times, even the name social prescription, if someone is naturally a little bit more introverted, the idea of like meeting new people, group activities scares them. Fishing is kind of great, which tends, I think, to happen more with men because, you have a shared goal in mind. You can be silent as you do it. Right. And it's this classic, like, manly, like, bonding shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. And
over a task. Yeah.
Yes, over a task. And it was so funny. I show up like this zany American girl, zipped up on cold brew, ready to catch my fish, trying to fish with them. And like, it takes a long time. And I'm asking them like, how do I make this go faster? What do I do? Do I shimmy it? And they're like, you just got to be patient. And fishing's a great hack for that. Like you said, it literally forces you to be patient, to, as you said, anticipate the unpredictable. And yeah, it's sort of forcing you to sit still in nature in ways that if we were, just saying, okay, I'm going to sit still in nature, we might, give up more easily. Like there's a goal, right?
Exactly. And there's a goal. Exactly.
Yeah.
When it comes to ADHD, which, is the American Psychiatric Association's framework for a collection of symptoms that can be categorized as basically inattentiveness and impulsivity. And so many people have been diagnosed with this, as you mentioned. And for so many of them, I have found it has become part of their self-concept. It's part of their identity, which is problematic, but maybe for another conversation. But anyway, I think part of the reason that there's such an incredible explosion of ADHD diagnoses is complex, but one of the reasons I think is the stakes for paying attention are not high enough. I think for many people, life has become quite comfortable and they're not faced with much danger. They're not encountering risks and they don't feel like they're doing very high stakes activities. And nature, of course, is where we find all the danger, right? Like that's another factor I think in this, is that especially if you do a dangerous activity, like you go hunting or you go rock climbing or hike a treacherous trail, the stakes for paying attention are very high. Now there's a serious consequence if you don't focus. And I think many people would benefit tremendously from a high stakes situation where it's kind of like pay attention or get injured.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Let's prescribe some danger out here.
Right.
I think you're so right. Also, speaking of nature, sorry, the sun is really out. So I'm trying to like bob my head around it.
Right.
But yeah, you're so right. And, there's an interesting study in that chapter that talks about how kids, there was a study that demonstrated that kids who were diagnosed with ADHD, who were prescribed just 20 minutes in nature, had gained concentration capabilities with effects on par with taking Ritalin. Amazing. And so I think you're totally right that, and at least for kids, or at least it used to be the case, that like you are sort of more the natural course of, playing in the schoolyard, playing in the backyard, running around, getting dirty with your friends. Like, that was an opportunity to sort of like let kids be kids and experience danger and, have some fun with it. But as you say, figure out like hard things together. When you become an adult, though, those opportunities are so much fewer. And, I'm sounding like a broken record, but I do think a lot of the nature prescriptions in particular are reintroducing that sort of childlike wonder and adventure that we know is so essential. Like when we look back on our lives, those memories will be the strong ones, but that there are so few opportunities to actually like pursue in our lives.